So let's switch from the radial to the signal art reamping box. 100 Hz sine wave, massive difference. That's not a sine wave anymore. Wow, the radial sounds really clean and the signal art is really crunchy. Is that a problem? Let's find out. Welcome to the ultimate reamping box shootout, boys and girls. If you're in the market for a reamping box, or if you want to find out if you already own the perfect box, this is your video. Because today I want to compare 5 different boxes from 3 different brands. I want to compare their sound, their features, I want to compare their output level, such an important parameter, and I want to find out how much noise, hum, or even distortion they might introduce. And believe me, the results have surprised me in a few different ways. Anyway, if we do shootouts on this channel, we try to do them properly and as professionally as possible. You know that. So this is going to be a lot of fun. Let's find the perfect reamping box. Here we go. I highly recommend to watch the entire video so you fully understand what I'm talking about. But I know some of you guys have like more of a TikTok attention span. In that case, use the chapters below to navigate. I want to start with introducing you to the different contenders. And I want to start with this one. This is maybe the mother of all reamps and an industry standard. This is the passive original reamp box from Radial, the original circuit by Mr. John Cuny Bertie. And this is what I've been using for many years successfully. This sounds great, or it has always worked for me. And then we have another one from Radial, and this is their active reamp box called the X-Amp. Then we have a more affordable alternative from Radial called the Pro RMP, also a passive reamping box. Then highly recommended by a lot of you guys. This one comes from Palma, from Germany. This is the Trave reamping box. By the way, it's called Trave, not Trave. Trave is a German river. This one is the most affordable of them all, and a lot of you guys wanted to hear it. And finally, and it took me a while to find one, also highly recommended by you, another passive reamping box, this one coming from Signal Art. This one is no longer available, but there's a new version. I think they've sold the circuit to another company called United, and now they make some kind of double transformer reamp that includes this box. But a lot of you guys wanted to hear this one, so I found one in LA, took it home, and now we can include it into our shootout. So let's have a look at the features of the different reamping boxes. There are a few features that they all have in common. So they have a balanced XLR input, and they have an unbalanced output here, a jack output that goes into your guitar amp. They all have a ground lift, which is very important because there's always one setting that sounds like and one setting that sounds better. And they all have a level knob here, which in all cases is just a passive attenuation. I mean, they're all passive boxes except for this one, which means you can't boost anything. So this is just attenuation, you know, this just makes your signal quieter. Then some of the boxes have some additional features like this one. This also has a polarity switch, which can be handy. This one also has another jack input. I've never used it, but yeah, not bad. Then we have a mute switch here, which has rather irritated me, to be honest, because I remember wondering why I don't get a signal, and then I, had accidentally pushed this one, which just mutes the output to your guitar amp. And there's one really, really great and very musical sounding feature. It has an inbuilt passive filter that can be like switched off, or there's a low cut and a high cut filter, and the low cut really sounds nice if your palm mutes sound too boomy. It almost sounds a little bit like a tube screamer, so it really tightens the sound. Sometimes I use that. And then in case your DI sounds too harsh, you can also filter out the highs a little bit. Both very, very useful, very cool. The active X-Amp from Radial has 2 outputs. Another isolated output. So that means this one has an inbuilt splitter, which is cool if you want to simultaneously reamp through 2 guitar rigs, 2 amps, whatever. Otherwise, it's basically the same. Then this one doesn't have any special features. The Trave from Palmer is also very simple: input, output, ground lift, and level control. But this one has another really practical and helpful feature. It has a level switch on the input that switches your input signal from +4 dBu professional level to -10 dBV consumer level. And that basically means if you own an audio interface with a very low output, you can switch this to -10 and get an additional boost on the analog side, which can be really, really helpful. It can even save your ass. So that is very cool. And finally, the signal art box doesn't have any special features, just input, ground lift, level, output. That's it. I have already done a lot of reamping here. So now we can start comparing those different boxes. And I want to start with comparing their levels. Then I want to compare the distortion, the noise floor, and finally, we're going to do some listening tests. I want to start with comparing the output level of the different reamping boxes, and the differences are very, very extreme. Just have a look at this. So I was sending white noise here through all those different boxes, and I want to start with the signal art box, which is known for having a really, really hot output. It's this loud. If we now go to the quietest of them all, which is ironically the active reamp from Radial, let's hear that comparison. Signal art. And that's the Radial. Crazy. And all the other ones are like in between. That's not a 20 dB difference anymore, but something like 8 dB, I think. Still a lot. The Pro RMP is also very quiet. And the Palmer box is kind of close to the passive reamp from Radial. They're very close. However, you might remember that we have this -10 switch. So if you push that button, look what happens. It gets even louder than the signal art. That actually makes this one the most versatile of the bunch, followed by this one, because remember, this is just the maximum level. You can always attenuate this. Whereas all the three Radial boxes and also the Palmer in its normal +4 dBu setting are a lot more quiet. Well, why is that important? Let me explain. So what you want to achieve when reamping, you want to make sure that the signal that you are sending into your guitar amp is as close as possible to plugging your guitar straight into the amp, right? And what I've shown you in another video is that you want to leave the digital domain as loud, as hot as possible. So the converter, your D to A converter, is working at its full resolution. If you can always lower the fader in Cubase or Pro Tools or whatever you're using, but that's going to introduce more noise typically. So that means in the DAW, you want to be as hot, as loud as possible without clipping your DA converters. And then you want to use this to attenuate the level to be as close as possible to your guitar signal. Now, the problem is you can only make things quieter here and not louder. So if the signal is too quiet already, there's nothing you can do except for maybe boosting the gain on your guitar amp. But that's not really the right way to do it. Now you will probably ask me which of those boxes has the right level. And the answer is it depends. It depends on which audio interface or which DA converter you use. Each converter will convert your digital signal, your 0 dBFS full scale, loudest digital signal you can send out, into a certain voltage. Some are louder, some are more quiet. For example, in my case, I'm using an SSL alpha link converter. And if I send 0 dB digital full scale signal into that converter, in the analog domain, I'm getting +22 dBu, which is a lot. But sometimes I happen to use, especially when I'm on the road, this interface, also for reamping, which is the Evo 4 from Audient. Sounds great, by the way. But 0 dB digital full scale with this one is only plus 11 dBu. So this one is 11 dB quieter compared to the SSL. That's not a bad thing. You just need to know it, and you need to connect this to gear that can accept this level, okay? So in my case, I gotta say, all those boxes worked for me with the SSL converters because they're so loud, everything worked, no problem. And again, if you're too loud, you can simply, attenuate with the reamping box. But when working with this box, all three radial boxes were already a little too quiet. So I had to boost the gain on the amp a little more than if I just plug in a guitar. The ones that worked were this one, obviously, because it's much louder, and also the Palmer box, but only when I pressed the minus 10 dBV button, okay? So if we're just talking about output levels, these two seem to be more versatile than the radial boxes. But you know what? It's not only about having the right level, it's also about having a clean signal. And I can already tell you this one is not exactly clean. So let's move on to the next chapter. Next, I sent two different sine waves into the different boxes. I started with a 1 kilohertz sine wave, which sounds like this. And this didn't really do anything for me. It sounded and looks the same. And then I went on with a 100 hertz sine wave. And we know there's a lot more distortion in the bass compared to the higher frequency. So this is where it got interesting. The way I did this was, once again, I was sending out 0 dB full scale, like the hottest level, into the converters. And then on the way back into the DAW, I adjusted the level on the boxes so they all have the same level, but they will all hit with the same power. And if we look at the analyzer on this EQ, here you can see the test signal. So you see 100 hertz. And if I send this, for example, into the radial box, what we get is this. And this is a very clean signal. You can see some second and third order harmonics at 200 and 300 hertz, but this is at, minus 90 dB. So let's be honest, you're not going to hear that, especially not if you're hitting a high gain amp with this. So this was looking really good. Actually, the cleanest of them all was this one here, the cheaper Reamp, the Pro RMP. Let's have a look at that one. Almost nothing to see there, really, really clean. I think the Palmer also got quite close. Also very good looking. You're not gonna hear those differences. The active DI box was a little more harmonically rich. Here it goes up to almost 70 dB, but you're not gonna hear that. Now let's have a listen to this one, okay? This is gonna be funny. This is a Signal Arts. And this is not a sine wave anymore. This is really dirty. This is distortion. Wow, this goes up to minus 10, minus 20 dB or something. And you know what? You can reduce these harmonics by changing the level here because it's already happening at the input. So if you want to reduce or avoid these harmonics, this kind of distortion, what you got to do is you got to pull down the fader in your DAW, which, as we remember, is not good because you're gonna have less resolution and probably have more noise. But that's what I did here. So if I pull down the digital fader, it goes from this to this. But we still have around 20 dB more third order harmonics compared to the radial. So this one does not sound clean. So that means in order to get this one to sound clean, you have to pull down the level, and that means it's actually not louder anymore. So let's compare the corrected level of this one to the radial. Now it's even a bit quieter than the radial. So that means all the gain that this one gives you comes at the cost of additional harmonics, at least if you have a very hot interface like I do. But you know what surprised me? Let's have another look at the Palmer, because the Palmer, you remember, is equally loud and equally clean like the radial. And now I was expecting a lot of added saturation and distortion when pressing this -10 switch, but let's go there. Still fairly clean. Look at this. So yes, it's getting more saturated. So for some reason, the level boost that makes this one as loud as this one comes with a lot less distortion. Kind of cool. And then I moved on with reamping some real guitars through all those boxes. And I was actually recording a DI to be used for the reamping, but I also recorded the straight signal into the amp. So this is the DI. And this was a signal going straight into an amp. I don't remember what it was. It was a V30. And I also did some reamps with the Carnivore. And before actually listening to the different reamped signals, I want to show you that reamping always introduces additional noise. So if you're not forced to reamp, you shouldn't, because the cleanest signal you can record is just plugging your guitar straight into an amp. You can always record a DI as a backup, but you know, if you are in a studio and you can record the real thing, you know, just do it, because it's gonna sound cleaner than any reamping setup. So if we compare just the noise here, let's loop this. And I was using a lot of gain, so we get a lot of noise. This is the signal going directly into the amp. And now let me switch to the different reamping boxes. More noise. And you can hear all the reamping boxes sound very, very similar. They have a very similar noise and no hum at all. Here's another reamping session I did with the Carnivore. This is the radial, this is the Palmer. Here the noise sounds slightly different, but that's the good news. From the cheapest to the most expensive, they were not introducing any weird noises, no hum, and they all sounded equally clean. So that's great. I want to do 2 listening tests. I've reamped this guitar signal that you've already heard, and I've also got a bass signal here. But let's start with the guitar signal, and that's going to be very, very boring. So we've got the signal arts here, radial, RMP, active, radial, Palmer, and the direct amp. Let's start with the direct amp, and I'm going to go through a few of them. And back to the direct amp. And this all sounds very, very close. I feel like both the signal art and the radial reamp actually sound very similar. I have the impression that the active radial sounds a little more brittle. Is that just me? Let's try again. So this one seems to have a little more high end. I'm talking about the active radial and the Palma. And the Palma maybe goes into a similar direction. By the way, I'm not going to do null tests because you're always going to hear stuff, but I could not hear anything meaningful here in the null test. It doesn't tell you anything. You always hear some stuff there, so let's not do that. But my very subjective impression is that both the Palma and the active radial sound a little brighter than the signal arts and the passive radial. My subjective impression, because the differences are very, very small. I don't even care, I would say. They're all very much usable and they all sound very, very close to the original. I want to show you one more thing, a reason why you should actually use any reamping box, because I've also reamped it without a reamping box, and that was just by attenuating the level digitally and maybe using a ground lift. So first of all, it's way more noisy compared to this. And it sounds a little broken. Can you hear that? The high end gets harsh and broken. I can still hear the noise, by the way, and the low end just gets thinner and it sounds a little more like an industrial metal tone. Using a reamping box, any reamping box, totally makes sense. Time for the final listening test, and in this example I have recorded a bass DI, which sounds like this. As low and deep as possible, and the idea was to find out if my rather theoretical test with the 100 Hz sine wave, which made this box produce a lot of harmonics, is just theory, or if this is also audible in a real world experiment. So it's not going to get more bassy than this, you know, a bass guitar going dung, 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 dung. Let's find out if we can actually hear those overtones or not. Short section, I'm going to start with a radial passive reamp. And let's be honest, they all sound so close. At least to me, it doesn't matter. Now let's compare the radial to the signal art. Okay, and I think I can hear a difference in this example. The signal art sounds a little louder and a little fuller. By the way, they all have the exact same peak level. And ironically, I think this actually sounds really good, at least for a DI track. So I think there is a difference here. And I mean, I don't even know if the guys who created this actually wanted this box to be not as clean as other reamping boxes. I don't know, but I feel like there is a difference, and it reminds me a little bit of adding a plugin like this, like our bass from Waves, you know, that also adds overtones, that makes a bass sound fuller, and it sounds a little louder. It's not compressed, but it sounds a little louder. Anyway, still, this difference is minimal. It is minimal. I just assume that the other ones all sound cleaner than this one, and then it depends on what you want. But it feels like this has a certain sound. Okay, time to sum it up. I gotta say, I am a little disappointed, because if I'm being very honest, all those Reamp boxes sound great, and they all sound very similar. And if we just focus on the sound or the tone of those boxes, you can't go wrong with any of them, because they all sound great and they're not going to make or break a production. With the guitars, I had the impression that the Palma and the active radial sound a little brighter. Is that a good or a bad thing? I don't know. And with a very bass heavy signal, I had the impression that this one sounds a little fuller and a little louder, probably because of some added harmonics, but I don't know. Those differences are very, very small, and you can't go wrong with any of those boxes sound-wise. Now, the levels of those different boxes are very, very different. You gotta find the right one for your interface. By the way, I forgot to mention, some interfaces also have switchable output levels, so you can adapt. But you gotta make sure that the reamping box that you buy can actually handle the output of your interface. So maybe have a look at the output level of your interface first. In my case, I kept on using the original Reamp. It sounds great. I really like all the features. I like the, where are they? The inbuilt filters. It just works with my interface, and it is rock solid and really well built. So yeah, it just worked for me, so I kept on using this. At least here in the studio, when I'm on the road reamping with this little box or my bigger Evo 16, then I have been using both the Palma and the Signal Art, because they both have a higher output level. The other two radial boxes, I would recommend them the least. I mean, this one is more affordable, which is good, but they both have the weakest output, which means you really need to have a high output interface, unless you need to save some money, or you really need the two outputs here, which can come handy. I wouldn't go for these ones. I would rather, if you want to go radial, I would actually go for this one. But maybe the secret winner of our shootout is actually the Palma box, because it is the most affordable one. I think it's 79 euros or something here in Europe right now. And this one can actually handle all kinds of levels because of this switch here. It doesn't have any additional features, but it sounds good. Maybe a little brighter. It sounds good, and it works with pretty much anything. So this is recommended as well. But going back to the beginning, I've done a lot of testing, and all those boxes sound cool. I would have loved to tell you that this one sucks and this one sounds clearly different and better than the other one, but it is not true. They all sound good. You can all make good records with them. You know, get one of them, make sure it works with your interface, and then move on and make music. All right, that's all for today. By the way, this is not a sponsored video. I did not get paid by any of those companies, and I haven't spoken to anyone. I'm just, you know, I was just interested in doing this comparison, this shootout. If you enjoyed the video, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, have a look into the video description as well, because I'm gonna add links to all the different boxes, and also to a few more videos that I did about reamping and about DI boxes that you might enjoy as well. I think that's all for today. I see you in hell, my friends. Motherfuckers. Bye-bye.